And welcome to the Daily Space Weather. It's another exciting edition here. We've got major sunspots, a large solar flare risk, as well as coronal mass ejections headed right toward Earth. We'll talk about it and lots more today at the Smash News Network, least busted name in news. This is the past 24 hours from the closest star here, as videoed by the Solar Dynamics Observatory. You may see some large sunspot groups there in the northern hemisphere. Here's a zoom in on the equatorial view. And those are some big sunspots in the north, for sure. They are also magnetically complex sunspots. And there's a money shot for you. Pretty sweet indeed. That sunspot does pose a risk for large solar flares. And while it is not as big as this sunspot over in the northwest has an even higher probability for producing large flares. And the likelihood of an X-class flare is very, very high as this sunspot sets on the northwestern limb. Let's take a look at sunspots real quick from the SDO HMI instrument. The continuum imagery there. A little bit of growth around that sunspot. Especially, I mean, this one here is what I'm talking about. And besides that, things are pretty stable for the past 24 hours. Here's the magnetogram. So a little bit of growth there. We may get another group named up here, this one north of this large sunspot. And we'll talk all about it here in just a minute. First, about the channel. Check out our merch shop if you haven't seen it yet. You can save 20% by entering the promo code extravaganza on the Redbubble shop. You can find the merch linked below this video right in the description. Just click the description down there. You will find a link to the Redbubble shop. And this public service message is, do not pole vault the caldera. If you're into athletic endeavors, pole vault the regular thing, the little bar that people pole vault. That's a normal thing. If you're going on a volcanic vacation, leave your vault pole at home. Don't pole vault the volcanic caldera. That could be unhealthful. And don't forget to enter the promo code extravaganza when you pick up some merch. This is our best seller, by the way. And of course, this public service message is brought to you at massive personal risk and expense by the channel, like the content itself. So perhaps pick up some merch and tell your friends and foes about the channel via a handsome t-shirt or maybe a dress or something. I don't know. We've also got a Hemp Lucid link linked below the video. So check that out. Shop at Hemp Lucid via our link. Check out the sweet products, whether they're Delta 8s, CBD tinctures, immune stacks, mushroom gummies, body balms, and even CBDs for your pets. Today's featured product from the Amazon shop is the the chrome shoes, part of our spacewear collection. Check those out. You can find those on our Amazon shop at amazon.com/shop/smashomash. You can even find a video about it yesterday on the Instagram page. And did you know we're also on Twitter? We are also on Twitter. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Let's see what volcanoes are erupting here as we move on with the daily space weather. Karimsky on the Kamchatka Peninsula is now back on the list. It's producing a 7,000-foot plume of volcanic ash. Flight level 070 moving to the northeast at 10 knots. Abiko also erupting there, south of the Kamchatka Peninsula on the Paramushir Island. That's producing a 10,000-foot ash plume, flight level 100. Flight level 060 from Suwanose Jima. Mount Mayan continues to erupt on the Isle of Luzon, Philippines. 9,000-foot ash plume from Mayan. Bagana exploding. 8,000-foot ash plume on Bougainville Island, Papua New Guinea. Popocatépetl exploding as well. It's producing a 22,000-foot plume of volcanic ash. And some ash fall there showing up at Amecameca and Ayapango, Mexico. Nevado del Ruiz, let's see. Looks like decreasing activity happening there at Nevado del Ruiz in Colombia. The Servicio Geológico Colombiano emphasizes that the volcano is still active and may increase suddenly in monitoring recordings and or erupt at any time. Nevado del Ruiz there, still expected to continue erupting. Sangay in Ecuador exploding, flight level 200. Revenador exploding, flight level 160. That's a 16,000-foot ash plume. Sabancaya unable to detect that. May be cloudy there in Peru. And Ubinas has sporadic emissions shown. Next, we'll look at earthquakes for the past 24. There is the past 90 days. And we'll cite earthquakes over a 5 magnitude. Pretty calm seismically speaking. There were some 5+ magnitude quakes like this 5.1 near the coast of Ecuador. That was at 14:07 Universal Time yesterday afternoon. Indonesia had a 5.0 as well. 16:55 Universal Time yesterday afternoon. That one was at extreme depth there, over 120 kilometers estimated. Over 120 kilometers estimated depth for that Indonesian quake. Russia had a 5.8 there, out on the east coast of Russia. That was at extreme depth as well. That 5.8 occurred at 23:28 Universal Time yesterday, and the depth was 442 kilometers. Fiji also had a 5.6. It remains the most seismically active portion of the planet. Some small quakes there on the coast of California. And the last 5 or larger quake occurred near Tonga, a 5.4 at 10:54 this morning, Universal Time, and that was at 113 kilometers estimated depth. So that's the earthquake coverage, and now it's time to return to space, a frontier. Let us know in the comments if you think it's the final frontier. Not to offend Gene Roddenberry. So you may see some activity coming from up here, and indeed, there was a CME right there. And pretty soon, it's going to be right here. Yeah. It's exciting stuff. Let's talk some additional space weather stats here. The 10.7 centimeter radio flux is next on my list. It's now at, hey, that's a good question. I think it's at 151 solar flux units. There is the 1-year graph. The black line represents the 10.7 centimeter radio flux. And don't expect this dip in solar activity to continue because, well, there are some reasons why we are expecting continued upticks in solar activity. And thanks for leaving a comment, Acrylic D. All right, so continuing on here, the Space Weather Enthusiast dashboard. It is not forecasting any geomagnetic storms for the next 3 days. However, things will change on July 1st, we think. So that's NOAA's forecast there, and let's take a look at their Enlil spiral because, well, again, there is a CME headed Earth's way. We're not expecting a major impact, and it looks like NOAA is expecting, let's see here, and just looking at their Enlil spiral. So NOAA and NASA largely agree on the trajectory of this one. They're both basically forecasting a glancing blow type coronal mass ejection impact. You can expect maybe a KP6. I wouldn't expect it to get above a KP7 from this. So we are expecting geomagnetic storms, and the possibility of maybe seeing some at mid-latitudes is there. So here's the NASA forecast, and NASA's showing up quite a bit larger and more significant coronal mass ejection there, although it is showing it missing Earth. So there's a disparity between the NASA and NOAA forecasts. NOAA expecting an impact on July 1st. NASA expecting a miss, it looks like. So that's the forecast for the CMEs. We'll show the graphics of those here later in the video. So here's Earth's magnetic moment from space. And at the moment, things are geomagnetically calm. As the system tries to reach static equilibrium there, that is depicting magnetohydrodynamic pressure. It is the last 4 hours. And we do show it daily on the channel. So that's what's going on at Earth's magnetic moment from space. Here's Earth's magnetic moment from the ground. Again, the last 4 hours. It's our ground magnetic perturbations map. It depicts changes to Earth's B field, geospace delta B, and the units are nanotesla magnetic flux density. Again, that's the last 4 hours of Earth's magnetic moment from the ground. Geomagnetically calm conditions. The KP index currently at 2.33. And if you're new to the channel, the planetary K index is an average of global geomagnetism. Real-time solar wind here, pretty unremarkable for the past 24. It's fairly average as far as the speed and pretty low as far as the density. So the density here only 2.67 protons per cubic centimeter. Solar wind speed here 439 kilometers per second. Moving right along to the GOES magnetometers. I think I might have forecasted these arc jet moments in yesterday's video. I said, yeah, there's going to be some maneuvering, and indeed the GOES 18 did use its thrusters. That's what those arc jet moments are. The thrusters create plasma, which can affect the magnetometer readings. And hence, NASA shows it. I'm sorry, that's NOAA, not NASA. And let's get to the heliosphere current sheet. And there's another sector boundary crossing showing up here. Earth may move to a South Pole current sheet as early as tomorrow. You can see that in red. So a little bit of activity here kicking up. We are still awaiting the movement of this coronal hole. Still hanging out at the North Heliographic Pole. Here's our line of sight field plot. This depicts 4 days of activity. And you can see that B field popping out there. Kind of right on the equator. Could be an indication that there is another sunspot about to rise in the north. Next we'll move to coronal holes. There is our coronal hole line of sight field plot. And eyes on this coronal hole up here. We are still awaiting that thing's movement. That coronal hole needs to move down toward the equator before we will declare that we are at solar maximum. Of course, there are other features, like namely the magnetic field strength. But hey, let's take a look at the coronal holes here from SDO's perspective. So there are the past 24 hours from SDO, 211 angstroms. And this is the coronal hole that I was talking about. That could suddenly move, and we're kind of hoping that it does it sometime soon while it's facing Earth, or at least wait until the next time it's facing Earth to move, because we want to see this stuff because it may help with the understanding of heliophysics. Next thing we're going to talk about is sunspots. We've got some spectacular imagery today of sunspots, as if we didn't already show you enough. So check this out. Here is the flare probability monitor and the solar flare scoreboard. We still do have quite a few sunspots here, although the number is declining. The most likely place to see a large flare, in my opinion, is actually this group up here. It would be 3340. And the second most likely place to see a large flare would be 3354, this huge sunspot right in the Earth strike zone. So there's the sunspot situation. Very high likelihood of large solar flares continues here for a couple more days unless the sunspot suddenly degrades, and that is a thing that can happen. So here's the equatorial zoom. And why don't we get a little closer? So a little bit of growth of that sunspot there, and I think there will be another group named to its north. No, maybe not. All right. But it has grown a little bit here since yesterday. Again, the most likely place. What happened? I think I forgot to put up one of our videos, folks. Just give me a minute here. There we go. That is the most likely flare location. Continuing on. So, as it approaches the limb, don't be surprised to see an X-class flare from it, or additional M-class flares. Next, we'll talk about solar energetic particles and solar flares. No solar energetic particle events. The GOES proton flux remains flatlined. And we did have an M-class flare here earlier this morning. Peak flux was about M2. It was a fairly long duration flare there. Just under an M2 class flare there. Peak flux was around 8:45 universal time this morning. And let's take a look at flares from the SDO 131 plus 94 angstroms wavelengths. Indeed, that recent M-class flare did come from this sunspot group up here. Expect the activity to continue from that sunspot group. A little closer zoom for you. Some activity in those southern groups as well. And here's a close-up of that massive sunspot right in the Earth-facing portion of the solar disk. And here's this huge setting group in the northwest. Moving right along here, it's time to see what's going on overhead because, well, it's time to talk about coronal mass ejections and filaments and so on. So we like to orient people so they know what's going on, where things are located. It helps to visualize things. People are very geographic in the way their memory works. And that's what's going on overhead right now in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Jupiter and Saturn are high in the sky at the moment. As I've been saying quite frequently, if you're viewing the post-sunset sky, go take a look at that. You might see Mars and Venus very close together there, just north of the ecliptic. Here's your solar system forecast. We're going to show you 1 week in advance where things will be. And of course, as Earth moves past Saturn and Jupiter later this year, people will claim that that Saturn and Jupiter are going to kill us and things like that. It's pretty silly, but hey. Important fact, folks. The Earth doesn't orbit the Sun. The Sun and the Earth both orbit the common center of gravity in the solar system. So there's that. They're orbiting each other. Everything is orbiting each other. And here's your solar system forecast. That's where things will be in a week on July 5th. And let's move to coronal mass ejections, especially since there's one on the way. So it did happen yesterday. There you can see it coming out of primarily out of the northwest. I mean the northeast, which would be your upper left. And right here is that CME. Expecting an impact from that on July 1st. I agree with the NOAA forecast here. Keep in mind, NASA does have more skin in the game than NOAA does. So that's 104 frames.